2 rules of acing a front-end interview. Number 1. Master JavaScript. Number 2. Never forget rule number 1. Warren Buffett has famously never said any of this. But if he had, he would have been pretty correct, because from my years of interviewing dozens of people and working for relatively successful tech companies, this is your single most important success factor: JavaScript mastery. In my opinion, with good JavaScript or TypeScript, your chances are maxed out and other problems will appear relatively small. Of course, there's so much more to the front-end profession and some roles may be more specialized, for instance in CSS or accessibility, but for the most part, what is a modern front-end app without JavaScript? Not much. If you want to test your current JavaScript or TypeScript knowledge, my other videos will help you with that. The very next thing you should have mastered before a React interview is React. Hooks, use state, use effect, use ref, virtual DOM versus DOM when components re-render, React keys, context. If you don't know these core features, not only can it disqualify you, but it can also take away a lot of your confidence and precious time during the interview. Okay, now on to the fun part, live coding. I prepared the following example task. Table of stocks. The requirements? Build a small React application that retrieves a list of stocks from a backend API and renders it as a table. Each row is a company name and stock price. The data should refresh every 5 seconds. You have absolute freedom in deciding the backend API. Let's assume you're not going to run it, so you can ignore the CSS. With tasks like this, many of the details aren't really specified. Feel free to ask about them, but don't make the mistake of overthinking every single aspect and doubting yourself on every step. You can always correct yourself later and explain your decisions. So, if our solution were this horse, you totally want to start with this, even the most basic and flawed implementation. And not with that, a perfect solution, but to just 5% of the task. By covering base requirements quickly in the form of an MVP, you'll have plenty of time to improve the code and discuss all the topics later. So, back to our task. I'm pretending to be the candidate and will go for a very simple execution plan. Decide on the backend API just as we are asked. Create the component that stores the stock state and renders the table based on that state. Lastly, fetch the stocks from the API. I suggest a simple REST API endpoint returning stocks as a JSON array. Assuming prices always have 2 decimal places, we could store cents as integers. We'll call this each 5 seconds, a technique known as polling. I define the types for the JSON response we just saw. Now we can implement the React component. We add useState for the array of stocks, initially empty. To render it, we simply use an HTML table with a header, the company and price, and then the table body, map all the stocks to rows. We have a list of nodes, so a unique key is required. For some reason, candidates love to overcomplicate it. Just assume the unique ID comes from the backend. Don't generate anything, don't use a title or the index or both, just a unique stock ID. The last point from our plan, fetch the data from the backend. We can suggest that a library offering a hook such as useQuery is the safest solution, but let's assume the interviewer insists on using a manual fetch, so there we go. We use a typecast or pass a generic parameter so the TypeScript knows our JSON contains stocks. Finally, save them to the state. Voila, almost there. And how to request the data every 5 seconds? Let's use setInterval, which does exactly that. Return a cleanup function to stop it when the component is unmounted. Oh, and I forgot about the hook dependencies. We don't want our interval to be triggered on each re-render. Okay, so a few minutes in and we already got something, a horse that can probably even walk. Arguably, this is much better than having a perfectly crafted solution to just 10% of the task. You're good on time, relaxed, and confident thanks to your progress. As an interviewer, I can now ask you 1,000 questions. And you can also proactively tackle the issues you spot in your code. The first problem I see is using set interval to perform tasks periodically. What if our request takes more than 5 seconds? We may run into a race condition. Let's use a set timeout, which will trigger after each response. Now, requests always run sequentially, one after another, and we are safe. Notice that our logic changed. We now wait 5 seconds after each response, even if the request took 20 seconds. This is not objectively better or worse, just a different UX. If we were asked to keep the interval always fixed around 5 seconds, as it used to be, we could measure the time since the last request, then subtract it from 5,000 and set the timeout with that value, or 0 if more than 5 seconds passed. We have many more issues and topics to cover. How could you implement a manual refresh? From the UX perspective, a button with a loading state would do. By the way, a UI state we completely ignored. From a technical view, we have to cancel the previous request and call fetch data. Similarly, we've completely ignored the backend errors and any UX for that scenario. When handling them, remember that all cleanups and cancellations should happen regardless if the request succeeds or fails. Is there an alternative to the HTTP polling we just used? There is also a long polling technique that is somewhat similar. WebSockets would have been a radical improvement for real-time data. If you only want one-way communication, there's a much more lightweight solution called server-sent events. What if we want our component to be parameterized with a prop that says which stocks we should fetch and render? The task isn't as simple as adding them to the query. We need them in the hook dependencies. Can it possibly break our existing code? Another nice extension to our app would be to add a field that allows us to filter the stocks by the company name. I could go on and on, which just proves how productive such a simple task can be for the interview. I intentionally leave all of these questions answered at most partially so that you can think about them and practice by trying to implement them. I want to summarize this video by saying that everything here is based on my interviewing experience with various companies and people of different seniority from all over the world. When stressed, constrained by time, and generally caught off guard, many people are shell-shocked and forget even the most basic JavaScript and React syntax. You'd be surprised how many cannot get past the simplest tasks. If you have an upcoming interview, maximize your chances by practicing JavaScript or TypeScript and approach your live coding with confidence. As always, thank you very much for watching, subscribe and let me know what you'd like to see next. Best of luck!